The first time Melinda noticed the ring on her left hand, it felt like a beautiful mistake. The diamond caught the light in their tiny off-campus apartment, throwing tiny rainbows onto the ceiling. She would lie in bed next to her husband, Jackson, and watch those shimmering fragments dance, convincing herself they were symbols of the colorful future they were building. They were both so young, just 22, with the entire world spread out at their feet like a banquet. Jackson was already training for the teams, his body a testament to relentless discipline, his mind a fortress of focus. Melinda was finishing her degree in elementary education, her heart full of songs and storybooks and the quiet ambition to shape young minds. It was a classic American love story, or so she believed. He was the handsome, steely protector, and she was the gentle, warm-hearted nurturer. They complemented each other. They balanced each other. They were going to build a life that mattered. Jackson's personality was a force of nature. It filled every corner of their small home. When he was home, he was present, his energy crackling in the air. He was possessive in a way that Melinda initially mistook for passionate devotion. He wanted to know where she was every minute, who she talked to at the university, what time she'd be back. He'd laugh it off, pulling her into a tight hug, his voice a low rumble in her ear. "A man in my line of work knows the dangers of the world, Mel. I'm just making sure my girl is safe. You're my anchor, the one good, pure thing I get to come home to." His words were a drug. They made her feel cherished, protected, impossibly special. But she was the soft landing for a hardened warrior. It was a role she wore with a kind of solemn pride. The first time his temper flared, it was over something so trivial she almost laughed. He'd asked her to pick up a specific brand of protein shakes, and she'd come home with a different one. The one that was on sale. His face, which had been relaxed a moment before, seemed to close in on itself. His jaw tightened, a muscle twitching violently in his cheek. "I asked for the Muscle Farm," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "It has the right BCAA profile. This other stuff is garbage." Melinda blinked, still holding the grocery bag. "Honey, it was $3 cheaper, and the nutrition label looks almost identical." "I thought." "You thought." He cut her off, taking a step closer. "You didn't think. You just did what was easier." That's the problem with civilians, Mel. You don't understand precision. You don't understand that details matter. In my world, the wrong detail gets people killed." He grabbed the carton of shakes from the bag and slammed it onto the kitchen counter so hard the plastic cracked, sending a white, chalky liquid oozing onto the floor. He stared at the mess he'd made, then at her. His eyes a mixture of anger and something that looked like surprise at himself. He took a deep breath, his shoulders slumping. He walked over and wrapped his arms around her stiff body. "I'm sorry, baby. I'm sorry. I'm just stressed. The training is kicking my ass. They're pushing us to the limit. I shouldn't have taken it out on you. You know I love you, right? You know you're the only good thing I've got." She nodded against his chest, her heart hammering. She told herself it was the stress. She told herself that the life of a SEAL candidate was unimaginably hard, that it forged men in fire, and that fire sometimes had to have a place to go. She was his safe place, his release valve. It was a burden, but one she accepted as part of the package. She cleaned up the spilled protein shake, and he went for a long run. By the time he came back, sweaty and exhausted, he was gentle again, bringing her flowers and apologizing again. The incident was filed away, not forgotten, but neatly explained. The apologies became a rhythm in their marriage. After every blow-up, every slammed door, every cruel word spoken in a moment of frustration, the apology would come. It was always eloquent, always laced with self-deprecation and a reminder of his immense pressure. He would hold her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheeks, his gaze intense. You know I'd never really hurt you, right? I'd die before I let anyone hurt you. You're my wife, my other half. Forgive me, Mel. I'm a work in progress. And she did forgive him. Because she loved him. Because she believed in the man she knew he could be, the man she saw in the quiet moments when they were just a boy and a girl in love, watching a movie on the couch. She believed that the Navy was building a weapon, and that once he was finished being built, the war in his mind would end. She didn't realize that the weapon was being built to always be at war, and that she was becoming part of the battlefield. The day he got his trident was the pinnacle of their life together. Melinda sat in the audience at the graduation ceremony, her heart so full it ached. She watched the rows of granite-faced men in their crisp dress whites, but her eyes were only for him. When his name was called, and he walked across the stage to receive the coveted Golden Eagle, clutching a musket and trident, she wept. It was more than pride. It was a validation of every sacrifice, every lonely night, every forgiven outburst. This was what it had all been for. This was the man she had helped build. As the crowd of hundreds of family members and fellow warriors cheered, Jackson caught her eye in the crowd and gave her a small, private smile. In that moment, he was her hero, officially, indelibly, a Navy SEAL. After the ceremony, he found her in the crowd. He swept her up in a hug that lifted her off her feet, spinning her around. His teammates slapped him on the back, grinning. The hard part's over. See, babe, he whispered in her ear, his breath warm. Now we just get to live, you and me. That night, at a celebration with his entire class and their families, he was charming, gracious, and humble. He introduced Melinda to everyone as the Rock, the one who kept me sane. She beamed. She was the wife of a Navy SEAL. It was a title she wore proudly, a badge of honor she thought she understood. But the hard part wasn't over. It had just begun. The Jackson she knew from training, the one with something to prove, the one who was constantly being broken down and rebuilt, had been replaced by a Jackson who had to maintain that state. The discipline, the intensity, the unwavering standard of excellence didn't switch off. It became his permanent operating system. And in the quiet, mundane world of their apartment, there was no enemy to fight, no mission to complete. There was only life. And life, with its messy details and unpredictable variables, began to feel like a deployment he couldn't win. The first year after he got his trident was a series of escalating fault lines. He was gone for months at a time, for training, for schools, for workups. The reunions were explosive with passion and relief, a honeymoon phase that lasted a few glorious weeks. Then the friction would start. He was used to a world of absolute order and control, a world where his every need was anticipated and met by a well-oiled machine of a platoon. He came home to a world where the laundry piled up, where dinner wasn't always ready at 1800 hours exactly, where his wife had her own opinions about how the furniture should be arranged. He didn't see these as normal, mundane differences, and he saw them as deficiencies, as failures to meet the standard. You had all day, he'd say, his voice tight, gesturing at a sink with a few dishes. What did you even do? Melinda, tired from a full day of teaching a class of 27 rambunctious first graders, would feel her own defenses rise. I taught, Jackson. I dealt with crying kids and parents and lesson plans. I'm not a housemaid. We live here together. He'd scoff, a new, bitter sound. Together. Right. You don't know what together means in the teams. It means if I fail, we all fail. It means my life is in your hands. It's a little different from finger painting and nap time. The comparisons were a new, sharp weapon. He would hold up the brutal life-and-death camaraderie of his profession against the perceived softness of her world, diminishing her work and her struggles, her very identity. He was a warrior, a man who walked in the shadows and faced down evil. She was a schoolteacher. The imbalance in his mind was stark and absolute. Melinda began to walk on eggshells. She became hypervigilant, a habit she'd learned from him. She'd scan the apartment before he came home from a deployment, making sure everything was in its place. She'd plan her conversations, editing out anything that might trigger him. She learned to read the temperature of his mood the moment he walked through the door. The man she loved was still in there, but he was buried deeper and deeper under layers of operational stress, ingrained intensity, and a quiet, simmering anger that seemed to have no single source. He never hit her. He never threatened her. The thought that it could ever get to that point was absurd. And he was a protector. He was one of the good guys. That was the core of his identity, and by extension hers. Then the deployment to Iraq happened. It was his first real combat tour. He left as her husband, the man who sometimes forgot to take out the trash and who could be made to laugh by a silly movie. He came back 8 months later as a stranger wearing her husband's face. The change was profound and terrifying. His eyes, once capable of warmth, now held a flat, distant look. He was haunted. He would wake up in the middle of the night drenched in sweat, his hands reaching for a rifle that wasn't there, his body coiling to strike an enemy that existed only in the landscape of his nightmares. He wouldn't talk about what he'd seen or done. When she tried to hold him, he'd flinch away, his body hard and unyielding. Say, the temper that had once been a contained fire was now a wildfire. He would fly into rages over the slightest thing, a car backfiring outside, a television show that he deemed pointless, a question she asked about his day. He would pace the apartment like a caged animal, muttering to himself, his knuckles white as he gripped the back of a chair. Melinda felt a fear she had never known. It wasn't fear of him exactly, but a pervasive, gut-wrenching fear for him and for the fragile shell of their life together. She tried to be patient. She tried to give him space. She read articles about PTSD, about combat stress, about the challenges of reintegration. She was his wife, his partner. It was her job to help him heal. She suggested he talk to someone. A counselor on base. The reaction was volcanic. He rounded on her. His face inches from hers, his voice a low, venomous growl. You want me to go blab to some shrink? To tell him my problems? To get a note in my file that says I'm broken? That would be the end of my career, Melinda. Is that what you want? You want me to be a failure? You want me to be a civilian, working some 9-to-5 desk job so I can be home in time for dinner? The accusation in his eyes was devastating. He made her concern seem like a betrayal, an attack on the very core of who he was. She backed down, apologizing, retreating into her shell even further. She learned a new rule. Never mention his job. Never mention his mind. Never mention the war. She became a ghost in her own life. She stopped having friends over because he'd find fault with them, or more often, I'd just sit in stony silence until they felt uncomfortable enough to leave. She stopped talking to her family on the phone when he was home because her mom would always ask how he was doing, and the lies were getting harder to tell. Her world shrank to the size of their apartment, to the space between his moods, to the constant, exhausting task of trying to keep the peace. She was a keeper of secrets, a manager of chaos. She was a wife, yes, but the title felt hollow now, stripped of all its earlier romance and pride. She was a caretaker for a wounded man who refused to see his own wounds, and the caretaking was slowly killing her. The memory of their wedding day, the crisp uniforms and the hopeful smiles, felt like a scene from a movie she'd watched a long time ago. The image of him receiving his trident, the pride and joy on his face. I was a photograph fading in the sun. She was living in the shadow of those